So hello everyone, welcome to our third installment of Wednesday Weekly Skillshare, a program all about learning a new life skill or general life hack during your time at Pacific. Today's session is all about gardening and planting. My name is Amber Mateer, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the graduate assistant of competitive sports and outdoor programming at Pacific Recreation, and I'll be today's moderator. This session will be recorded for later posting to our YouTube channel at Pacific Recreation. If you have any questions through today's presentation, you can drop them in the comment box, and I will ask them at the end of the presenter's time. The session is also live on Facebook, so if you're watching via Facebook and have a question, just drop it into the comment section. For any Pacific affiliated participant folks, I'm going to be dropping a little link into our comment section both on Facebook and on Zoom. So again, if you're a Pacific affiliate, just click that link at the end of the session to record your participation. And as a future plug, next week's session will be at 1:30 p.m. featuring Mary Connolly, and they will be going over some really important backpacking tips and tricks, especially if you were new to backpacking during quarantine. And at this time, I will hand the virtual microphone over to today's guest speaker, Molly.
There we go. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be joining you today. I am from New York, so California gardening is a little different, but that's where I'm coming from. I grew up doing a lot of gardening with my mom. She just loved gardening all around our house, and the neighbors' houses, down the street, the local church. So I've had a lot of experience in various flower gardens, farms, and food growing just for our family. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from, and thanks for coming today. I'm really excited to be talking with you about gardening. So let's see, share my screen. I have just a couple slides here about the overall of what I'm doing for my presentation. So talking about gardening. So we're going to talk about a little bit of basics for what plants need, just some basic starter stuff that you probably learned in Biology 101 in high school. But then also some more details about what you should grow, where to grow it, when to think about planting things, and then a few thoughts that I have on indoor planting and outdoor considerations, and then a few cool things that I like to do that maybe you can pick up. So that is all I have for that. So first of all, plants are great. I love plants because it's really fun to grow my own food. I have some friends here with me today that came out of my garden. This is a carrot that I pulled out about an hour ago. You can see there's still dirt clinging on it. It's just the best feeling. And a tiny onion that was too close to his friends, so I pulled him out to give them a little bit more space. So yeah, plants give us food. It's really freaking cool to just grow your own food and rip it out of the garden and eat it for dinner. So that's part of why I love gardening. And I know that plants are also, for me, something that really helps me feel like a room is my own and I feel at home in a space when there are green things around me. So that's my whole reason for gardening and why I love it so much. So some of the basics, this is probably a review if you know anything about plants. Plants need water, obviously. They need air as well. So for example, I have this little guy here. These are a bunch of kale, and I put them in a mayonnaise jar because it looked cute. And this is great because it gives them water. I can put the water in, it stays in. However, the air consideration, I typically need something that has drainage because plants need air in their roots, and that helps them be able to continue performing respiration and continuing to grow. So that's one thing you'll need to think about when you're growing plants. They also need light, so that relates to both light during the day, but the amount of light that we've got going on in this season. So light is one of the considerations I think about when I'm picking what to grow, where to grow it. And then obviously they need nutrients. So we're going to be looking for a soil that's able to support the plants and what they need and give them the nutrients they need, especially if it's food, in order for the plants to give us nutrients then. what goes in the soil is what's then getting drawn up in the plant and then put into our bodies. So that's what I have for basics. So what, when, and where do you want to grow? So some of my considerations are, first off, what to grow. What am I looking for in a plant? Am I hoping to get something that I can chop up and put on my sandwich for lunch? Am I trying to fill that corner of the room that's just a little too gray and I want something brighter? Do I want something that smells good? Do I want to be able to sprinkle little herbs in my dinner when I'm cooking? We've got windowsill plants in the kitchen, so we can just grab herbs. You can see this one has been grabbed on one side. We've used some of those herbs. These are my roommates. And then the other side is ready to go, and it'll keep growing those leaves. So when you're thinking about what you're going to grow, what's your reason? That's the first place I'll start what I want to grow. The second thing that I'll consider when I'm deciding what to grow is what kind of space do I have? So right here I have some little tiny spaces. I have a glass jar, I have, a makeshift planter, I've got maybe a pot like this, it's got drainage holes in the bottom. So what kind of space am I growing in? I also have a backyard. That's a big space. It's got a lot more sunlight and I can grow big things like potatoes. You're also going to want to consider what soil type you have. So if you've got just potting soil, that'll do well for some kinds of plants indoors. You can just dig dirt out of your backyard and put it in a pot and that'll work just well. But you have to consider whether that soil is going to really nourish the plant. So sometimes I know the soil in our backyard is pretty dry and sandy and clayey, which is great for drainage, but unfortunately that doesn't give the plants enough nutrients. So I've been adding a little bit of like compost and stuff to help give it the nutrients it needs. Picking what to grow. Do I want something that I can just set and forget? Or do I want something that's going to be every day? I'm going to be weeding out the little babies, making sure there's no weeds, making sure we've got the right number of plants for the space I have. So that will give me a different direction on what I'm picking to grow. Then once I've decided what I grow, when am I going to grow it? So the growing season is something that we'll have to consider. In New York, the growing season is about maybe March or April till September, October, November. I have to know when the ground is not frozen in New York. So that's what I'm thinking about back there. What I'm thinking about here in California is when is it going to be rainy enough? When is the sun going to be sufficient? So when you buy seeds, and here's an example, I've got a packet of chive seeds here. I'm going to check the growing season. On the back, this is really tiny, but you'll be able to see it if you could look this up after. There's a little map, and it has these little bars are different colors that code corresponding to the growing season in that area. So I'm going to say, oh, California is light blue. That means our zone, our growing season is September to February. And that's when plants are going to be happy outdoors. The growing season also affects stuff that you're growing indoors because plants are really good at measuring how long of daylight is going on. I think plants are really cool because they just have their little brains that know all these things that I don't even know. So they will say, oh, the day is short. Now's not the time to flower. Now's the time to just, hunker down, keep our leaves alive, but not do so much growing and photosynthesizing. Then when there's a longer amount of daylight, plants will really start to explode and flourish and bloom, and they will be expending more energy at that time. So you have to care for them a little differently. Then where am I going to be planting? So I talked about what size of space we have, whether you have a little planter, a bucket outside that you're growing on your front porch, whether you're growing indoors. You're going to want to consider whether the plant is hardy enough for the outdoors, the season you're growing it in, whether it's a perennial or an annual. So for example, I grew some sunflowers this year. And sunflowers are an annual, because once this plant dies, once this flower is finished blooming, it's produced its seeds, the rest of the plant and the roots just say, okay, we're done, and they stop growing and they brown and they just turn into soil again. They start to rot. But some plants are perennials. I'm trying to think of one, like I know a lot of indoor plants can seem like perennials. If I grew sunflowers indoors, they might keep going. But basil would be one. So I've got another friend over here. This is my basil. And this can be a perennial because it'll just keep coming back year after year, sometimes even if it's outdoors and it'll die off for the winter. Some of those roots will stay alive underground all winter while they're frozen, while snow's going on, there's no light, and then next year it'll spring up again. And that's something that you can check on a seed packet to say, is this an annual or a perennial? Is it going to come back next year, or am I planting it once? And it's using that space this year, and then when the growing season is over, it's going to die, and I'll put something else in that space next year. You'll also want to consider where there is sun and shade. So that's another thing. We're going to look back at our friend, the seed packet, and say, what kind of sun does this need? I'm not seeing on this seed packet specifically, but most packets will say, what kind of sun do they need? It'll be full sun or partial sun, full shade. So I've got a tree in the backyard. Do I want to plant underneath the tree? Do I want to plant out in the middle of the yard where the plant is going to get sun all day? So that's something where you're going to want to say, which way is my house pointing? Which window faces, east and west, to make sure your plant is getting that full day sun or indirect light or morning sun and afternoon shade. A lot of times that you can find that information that'll tell you what your plant will be happiest when you give it that amount of light. So yeah, that's my starter for what to plant, where to plant it, when to plant it. I already talked about indoor plants and how much drainage you're going to want and the light level. So I'm going to go back to Mr. Basil here. He is an example. I cleaned him up the other day, but this basil wasn't getting quite enough light because all of these stems here had leaves on them that were yellowing, and the tops of the plant that are reaching up, they're getting pretty long stems. So that tells me this plant is looking for more light. It's saying, I'm not reaching enough light, so I'm just gonna spring these stems way out there to get my leaves closer to the sun. It was in kind of a shady corner of my room, so it was trying to reach up and get closer to the window. So that's something that you can be looking for when you're growing something indoors is it responding well to the light? This kale is another fun example. It might be kind of hard to see on camera, but all of the leaves are facing in one direction, sort of towards the left of my screen, maybe the right of your screen. This plant has been facing one direction in the window, and these leaves are all reaching for the light. So I've been turning this plant around in the window to make sure that all these kale babies are reaching out and they're not going to become little flopped over plants by the time they're ready to plant outside. So just a consideration how much light you're getting. There are plants that like low light indoors, some herbs, some succulents. They will be happy in a shady place. I know spider plants are a good one if you're growing indoors without too much light. So yeah, that's what I have for indoor plants, just making sure that they're drained well. I should have grabbed the other one. I've got another ketchup container, and I didn't put any holes in the bottom, and the funniest thing happened. The sides of the container, oh, I think my Santa's little helper has come. This might not show up, but the sides of the container where the dirt was able to get some light, but there wasn't enough drainage going on, there's actually some moss or something growing in here that's really taking advantage of being super moist. And my chives are not happy. So this is an example of not enough drainage. This plant is not doing what it should be doing. If I make some holes in the bottom of this and put it maybe lid, that'll allow the water to drain out, and you'll have that nice balance of moisture and air in the soil. Moving to outdoor plants. So some outdoor plants, like sunflowers, I'm just gonna stick the seed right in the ground. I'll dig up the soil first, make it nice and soft, enrich it if I need to with compost. Some of the more recent science that I've heard of on farming practices says that you don't want to turn over the soil too much, because soil has a structure from top to bottom. So you'll have a little bit of topsoil, usually a couple inches, and that'll be rich with organic matter, leaves, bits of, all of the animals and plants that have been there before. Then you go a little farther down, and that organic matter will be trickling down in. And the farther you go down the soil column, which can be meters and meters, you'll get closer and closer to rock, and you'll have sandier soil. So we really like that structure to be there. So when I'm getting a garden ready, I tend to use my shovel, stick it straight down and kind of loosen the soil, kind of rough it up with my fingers or a rake. And that way I'm making sure there's enough air in the soil for our plants to be happy. But I'm not completely turning the soil over unless I know I have super sandy soil and I need to change the composition. So that's just a fun tidbit that I think is interesting, that the soil has this whole structure going on, and I think that's really cool. Yeah, ask me later for more questions on that. I took a whole soil class. Again, I'm going to emphasize, make sure you check your growing season. I made a mistake this year. I moved into this house in about March, and I was like, perfect. I know in New York, March is the season to start all kinds of plants. So I went crazy. I put in potatoes, I put in carrots, I put in kale, I put in onions, I put in all sorts of stuff. And it's been April, May, June, July, a lot of months. And this is my first carrot. Carrots don't take 6 months to grow. So you need to double check that your growing season lines up with when you're planting. Some seeds will say sow directly in soil at the start of the season. Some seeds will say start inside before you are going to plant them outside. Some seeds are like peas, for example. They don't mind being really cold, so you can plant them as soon as the soil is like soft enough to get a pitchfork into. So season is an important consideration, and it really varies by different plants. I know I'm talking a lot about vegetables because that's where my knowledge comes from, but it really applies to flowers also. Season, if you are buying a flower that comes already in a pot, maybe you've got one of these guys full of marigolds. Marigolds tend to be pretty hardy, but there are some other plants that while they're flowering, if you're moving them around, if you're deciding, I put it in the ground there, but it'll look better here because it's blooming. If you disrupt it during its flowering season, the flower is the plant's big hurrah. That's the part where it's putting out all of its energy to say, okay, I'm ready. We're going to do the reproduction thing, get the bugs to come, get the other flowers to send their pollen over. And so it's doing a lot of putting out energy. And so if you stress the plant during that time, it'll get kind of mad at you, and it might wilt, it might not be too happy, it might take a breather and flower again another time. So those are some considerations for seasonality of different plants. So that's all I have for the organized lecture part. Now I just have a few fun and cool examples that I'd like to show you. So I've already shown you Mr. Carrot. I want to direct your attention to, it's hard to see, I wish we were in person, but the camera will show you. You see how there's kind of a purplish part at the top? It's maybe the first finger full. A carrot is ready to pick when the top starts to poke out of the soil. So this carrot, he's got dirt all over him up till that point. It was actually like this in the ground. It was poking out. And that's how I know when carrots are ready, is they'll start to poke right out. And you'll see the thickness of the carrot. So I was like, this boy looks like a carrot that I would find in the store. And so I was I was able to know that he was ready to get pulled out for eating. So that's a fun carrot trick. Oh, and these greens are little. Carrot greens tend to be, 2 feet, a foot tall. Another sign that this was too hot, too dry, and too sunny of a season for Mr. Carrot to be growing. But he made it anyway, and I'm very proud of him. I have an onion. This guy, so I pulled him out because he's too close to the rest of his onion buddies. So spacing is one thing that's important. Another, refer to the seed packet, refer to the pot that you bought the plant in. So he's still got a little sprout at the top there. I'm probably going to plant him back in another spot where he can keep growing bigger. But this is cool because any onion in the store also is still alive, just the way this guy is. And if you let those onions sit around for a few months, sometimes one of them rolls in the back of the cabinet and forget about it, and then you're like, what's that smell? You've got a green thing growing, you can put that onion right in the ground, and it'll grow you, maybe not another onion, because the onion is formed already, but it'll grow you some onion tops, some onion greens that you can snip off and use like chives, or you just can have the pretty flower to look at. One of my favorite things to grow is potatoes. So I use potato. This one's from the store, but it's an example of the potatoes I did grow and eat about a month ago. So we know what potato eyes are. They are the little divots every time. Most potatoes from the store, they'll come looking like this. They've got little places where there's kind of a little dip in the skin. Those are the eyes. This one is starting to grow again. If we leave them in the back of the cabinet a little too long, the potato will say, ooh, I've got a nice dark place. I'm going to start growing. So this one is starting to grow a couple little eyes. You can use a potato just like this to start your own potato plants. So what you're going to do for that is you could plant him whole, but since this one's got 2 eyes on it, that's going to make 2 different potato plants that will each then produce more potatoes. So I want to spread them out a little bit. So I found another potato that was similar and just cut it right in half. And to plant potatoes, we want to put them pretty deep in the ground. They like to be 6 or 8 inches down, I think. And I just sliced it. The inside of the potato is just more food for that baby plant. And I made sure the eye was untouched. So I've been really gentle to this potato eye so it can keep growing. That's the initial root coming right out of there. It'll grow a root, and then it'll grow a stem right out of the same spot. So when I cut the potato, I made sure to dry it out. This guy, you can see he's kind of squishy. It doesn't look too hot. I wouldn't eat it, but this is ready to put in the ground. If I just cut a potato and put it fresh in the ground, because it's so juicy and moist, all those bacteria in the ground, those good bacteria that we do want, are going to jump on that potato and start eating it right up, and it won't be able to grow. So I just cut this, let it sit on the counter for 2 or 3 days. My roommates have been graciously avoiding it for the past 3 days while I was sitting on the counter looking gross. And now I know it's ready to put in the ground, so I'll be able to plant that guy. What else? Sunflowers. So I grew sunflowers, and this one's a really fun one because you let that sunflower head, it'll droop down. This is the stem here. You can see how bent it is. It was kind of hanging like this. Once that sunflower has drooped down, I cut it off, and now all of these seeds are ready to harvest. I'm just going to start breaking them out there, loosening them up, and there we've got some sunflower seeds. These you can eat, you can plant again. I just think that's so cool that this sunflower went through a whole life cycle and is ready to start again in about 4 or 5 months of growing. So this is a fun one I like to grow, and then I just keep these seeds till next year and put them in the ground again. So I'm going to be doing that in the next few weeks when California's growing season starts in December. Another fun tidbit here. So if we're starting inside, these are the store-bought version, way to go. You're going to fill them up with soil, put your little seeds, make sure there's you end up with about one plant in each little hole that you can then take out and put in his own place. But if you don't have one of those handy, you can also take a sheet of newspaper. This is a sheet of scrap paper. Anything, newspaper is ideal because it's kind of soft. And we're gonna make our own little plant pot. This, I think, is pretty fun. Take a can, soup can, drink can, whatever you got, a bottle, and just wrap the paper around it, leaving a little bit of space at the bottom. And then crush it right down. And this one, I left a little bit too much space at the bottom, but take it out and you've got your little pot here. And these boys do pretty well. You can fill it up with soil. You can stack them all next to each other. Let me try this one again because I want it to work the way it typically works when I'm making these. So this is what I use for starting all sorts of stuff in the spring. You know, starting herbs, starting beans, starting tomato plants. You really crush it down there. It should make a little pot that stands on its own like that. The funnest thing about this, once you've got your plant started, boop, I've got my little baby tomato, it's ready to go outside. I just stick this whole container right in the ground and the newspaper will rot away. And that way I haven't disturbed the roots of my little baby plant that I'm putting in the ground. So I think that's just a pretty fun little tidbit that I like to do. And then I know I've mentioned weeding and stuff. I will leave you with this last tip. Baby plants are very tender. When we have little ones, like these kale boys, they've gotten a little bigger, but you can sort of see there's a bunch of little dead leaves around here. And these ones are plants that were not treated quite nicely enough. So I might have messed with the soil a little bit. I might have let them dry out. When you have those baby plants, you're gonna really wanna make sure that they never dry out during the first few weeks of being alive. Because if they dry out, they're just so small that they don't have enough moisture inside them. Unlike this whole kale plant, it's got a whole bunch of room in there for extra water to hold it over till tomorrow when I water it again. But baby plants are super susceptible to any kind of getting dried out, getting too much sun, getting overwatered. They can get drowned pretty easily, or if you mess with their roots, they will pretty easily not make it. So yeah, that's what I have for planting and gardening, and thank you all so much for coming.
So we do have 3 questions for you, actually, Molly. So
Okay.
we're going to talk a little bit more. So the first question is, my corn stalks are being attacked by ants. How can I keep my corn safe, hopefully in a natural way?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I don't know specifically about ants. I definitely have had plants attacked by ants before. And I know that the ants are going after moisture sometimes. I'll have different animals attacking plants for moisture. So whenever there's a kind of bug on a plant, I first want to see if there's any kind of repellent. So I had a problem this year with slugs, and what I did was put salt around my plants. I didn't want to put the salt in the soil, so I kind of put a bag down and put salt around it. And slugs, when they come to salt, obviously they don't want to touch it, so they'll just turn around, and that way I made a moat, a little barrier around my plants. So there might be something of that nature for ants. You could put a trap, something sticky that will keep them from being able to cross a line on the ground before they get to your plants. Aphids are another one that I deal with pretty frequently. And I know you can spray soapy water, slightly soapy water, or this one's supernatural. Supernatural. If you boil rhubarb leaves, which are kind of poisonous, don't eat them. Do not drink the juice, not good for you. It's not good for aphids either. Boil rhubarb leaves and then spray that water right on the kale plants, and aphids will just die and fall off. So that's one natural bug killer I know of. It's rhubarb leaf juice. Thanks for the question. That was great.
So our next question is from Facebook. How often do you apply compost to indoor and outdoor plants?
So for indoor plants, I tend to use either potting soil or soil that I already know is pretty happy. So I won't continue to add more nutrients unless I know orchids are really finicky. I don't tend to grow orchids because they need so much food. So indoor plants, I don't tend to really add anything to. With outdoor garden spaces, I like to add compost every spring when I'm first planting, because that just gives another nutrient boost. And I also like to grow beans. That's another way of adding nutrients to the soil. Beans, legumes of any kind, are nitrogen fixers, so they draw nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil. So that's one way that I add nutrients to the soil, but about once a year, I'll add a good layer of compost and stuff.
All right, so our last question is, can you recommend any websites, social media pages, or books that you follow?
I like getting seed catalogs. There's a Fedco seed catalog that's really fun for me to just riffle through and see all the heirloom varieties, tomatoes and stuff. But no, I don't go out there for the media on planting. You stumped me. A good question, thank you.
All right, those are all the questions that we have in the queue. So this will conclude our Molly being a great guest speaker. Thank you so much, Molly, again for coming on and sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate it. And just again, future plug of next week, we're going to have a backpacking tips and tricks about how to keep nature as it is, and if you're new to backpacking, how to hopefully pack a backpack for the first time. That'll be at 1:30. And again, thank you, Molly. Appreciate your time.